Hi, it's Rachel Maldonado. Belief in the human spirit and desire to connect is the reason I want to tell your story and mine. And I am with Dr. Sabine Hazan, the top microbiome researcher. Tell me about this.
Well, I think I started my journey as a gastroenterologist and then kind of stepped into the microbiome, coincidentally when, I did a procedure called fecal transplant, the process of taking stools from a healthy donor and putting it in a patient with C. diff, which is a bacteria people get from taking antibiotics. And the patient improved his Alzheimer's. And I think that was the beginning for me to become that microbiome expert, to ask the questions. What's going on with Alzheimer's? Is it a gut-brain problem? Are we missing microbes that could be the culprit of Alzheimer's? And what's improving microbes? What's killing microbes? Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys in the microbiome space? And I think COVID really opened up that world for me, especially because of my interest in autism that I took on before the pandemic. So, it was kind of, a quest, a quest for knowledge. And this quest for knowledge, got me from medical school to gastroenterology to clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies to now leading the microbiome research clinically. And discovering all these things that are just amazing. If I tell you every day is Christmas, every day is Christmas in my world. I'm very passionate about this. I'm kind of like that girl that basically, punches people out of the way to kind of get to the front line to see the truth. So I don't want to hear from any side. I just kind of move on forward, fast motion to see the microbiome, to understand the microbiome. So I'm this, so-called expert, but really, I think the microbiome teaches us that we have to be humble and that we have because it's so many microbes out there, so much going on. And there's a lot of learning that needs to be done.
And you mentioned that you have to be feisty in a way. Is there a reason for that? Were people standing in your way?
Yeah, I remember going to give a lecture at the National Institute of Standard, and someone took me in her office. It was, one of the women at NIST, and she said, you are shaking the beehive of pharma. Now, remember, I come from a world of helping pharma, of bringing pharma, of developing products for pharma. And I said to her, look, I'm not here to shake the beehive of pharma. I'm here to take that beehive that's, destroyed and relocating it the proper way so that we can make some good honey, right? I'm not here to be a disruptor. I'm here to be a peacemaker to understand the microbiome. It's for our own good. We're not, we're all going to be patients. What we discovered from COVID is that nobody is immune. A virus came into the world and stopped all activities, stopped the world in motion. And I don't care how brave you were or how cowardly you were, everybody was affected. All races, all religions, all genders, everybody was affected. Heck, even the animals were affected. So, you know, when you see the power of a virus, that's when you basically start saying, how do I support myself? I know I have in me the ability to become resilient. I know I have in me the ability to save myself. How do I support myself? And really, you discover the microbiome. So that's what we did. We discovered the microbiome. I was the first guinea pig on the front line. I told this to my brother-in-law, who's a gastroenterologist like me, and he follows, within the box and the guidelines. He's you know, a rule-abiding citizen, which is fine, right? Because the majority of doctors don't have the ability that I have in the private sector to choose to go outside the box. They don't have a portal with the FDA to write INDs, investigative new drugs. They don't have the ability to raise funds to do the research. They don't have a genetic sequencing laboratory that's at their disposal that can do studies. They don't have scientists in their labs, right? So they are limited to what the guidelines are telling them to do, because if they step outside those guidelines, they get sued. And, in order to not get sued and step out of the guidelines, you really need a regulatory board, which is thousands of dollars. You need the FDA to overlook, which is, again, thousands of dollars. You need lawyers who are $1,500 an hour, So really, this is not a field that is to every doctor out there. So when people say, well, look, the doctors, they let us down. No, they didn't let you down. You saw they were limited. They were handcuffed. I mean, you saw what happened to Peter McCullough, and you and I both know Peter. You saw what happened to Pierre Corey, Paul Merrick, Jackie Stone, Mary Bowden. You saw all these people, what happened to them. Um, this is not something that every doctor has the courage to do. And this is not something that every doctor has the ability to do. Think of someone like Peter McCullough. I mean, he's published thousands of papers. Not every doctor can be a Peter McCullough that can publish data and that can quote data like that, right? Most doctors, they get the data from where they can get it, right? So, and there's a lot of data out there that comes on every day that we are not privy to, that we are not reading. So the majority of doctors during the pandemic, because it was so rushed and they were taking care of their family and their patients and the fear and everything, there's a question, there was a movement that happened that basically stopped them from, hey, let me read up all the data. They didn't get access to all the data. So what they got was what was on the news. Hydroxychloroquine was a bad drug, ivermectin was a horse paste, that's all there was. That was just propaganda. They didn't get to see the data. They didn't get to test to, I had 3 clinical trials with the FDA where I tested those drugs with the FDA watching me, So when the board of medicine came and said, well, Dr. Hazan, you treated patients with drugs that are outside, off label, I said, yes, but I had an FDA approval to run these trials. This is why we get it. This is FDA jurisdiction, right? So I think, it's very challenging these days. So to go back to your first question, was it a battle? Did I have to go like that? Yes, I did. And I still do, because here's the problem. The microbiome data contradicts what we know. The microbiome data tells us, hey, this is good. This drug that we thought was good and safe and effective is actually not so good or safe or effective when you look at the microbiome. And the microbiome tells you the story, right? And I can tell you this as, incidental finding, there's going to be a time where we are going to predict who's going to have Parkinson's and Alzheimer's before they develop Parkinson's and Alzheimer's or MS, even just from their microbiome. So we need to be more open to say, look, whatever we find, we find. And if it disrupts the narrative, if it conflicts with the price of the stock, well, guess what? It's going to benefit my health down the road. Because if you're that venture capitalist that's invested in whatever product, right? And then all of a sudden that product hurts you, you're going to go back and say, darn, I should have paid attention to the microbiome. I should have listened to Dr. Hazan when she was saying this drug is bad, but I was biased by the price of a stock. We can't do that anymore. We've got to be more open-minded. We've got to be more humble. The microbiome has trillions of microbes. There is no way anybody could figure this out right now in this lifetime, okay? And even AI, don't count on AI to tell you, because you have to train AI. Listen, I'm training AI, which is my favorite AI is Grok. And I love grog because it helps me, say my words. I'm a French girl, so, as a French girl, we tend to be a little bit on, the rough. We don't mean to be on the rough side, but we get perceived as being rough, right? Because we're basically, straightforward. The French are very straightforward. They say it like it is. And so not necessarily, culture. And on top of that, I'm not only French, but I was born in Morocco. So it's like a double whammy for me, So there's two personalities there that are just, very direct, very, moving forward. And so when I ask Grok, I say, well, how do I phrase this properly so it's understood better? And so it's very useful. Grok is very useful, but it's also very flawed because it's only given half of the narrative. Remember, there's about 10,000 papers out there that have been retracted, amongst them some of the Dr. McCullough's papers, some of mine. So Grok is only given half of the story. It's done on purpose to push AI to go for one narrative. It doesn't want anything that deviates from the selling of the product. Remember, I come from a world of having done clinical trials for pharma for almost 3 decades. So our job was doing the clinical trials, and then pharma kind of like pushes that drug out. And, for the most part, these drugs were safe and effective that came out. Think about the whole antibiotic world. Think about the whole biologic world for Crohn's disease, psoriasis, etc. That's as good as it got. I mean, it was definitely working. You see patients with horrible psoriasis, they start a biologic, they get better. Crohn's disease, they start a biologic, they get better. So for that moment in time, research was great and is great. But is it great to continue these drugs for a lifetime? Should I be giving a 4-year-old a biologic for the rest of his life, reminding him that he's a patient every 4 to 6 weeks, right? So when that question happens, and we could see we could do better for these kids, and we could say, hey, maybe the microbiome, maybe if I manipulate the microbiome, I can improve. I can use the biologics to get me up to here, but then I work with the microbiome to get me to here. And therefore, I get a better endpoint for my patient, where my patient doesn't need to remember that he's a patient every 6 weeks, where there's no question about long-term side effects of what these products do, right? So it's great for this moment in time, and it certainly was very lucrative for that moment in time. But the moment we start asking questions and we start seeing something else that might be better, we need to start embarking on that boat. And the mistake is that, I read somewhere that there's billions of dollars that are basically supporting the media right now, advertisement from pharmaceutical product. Well, it's, if a product is making $17,000 a month for the rest of a life of a kid, and the media is getting paid billions of dollars, they don't want to shake that. And so that doctor from NIST who said to me, you're shaking the beehive of pharma, she's right. But here's the problem. The CEO of the pharmaceutical company is going to have a kid with Crohn's disease. And he's going to come to Dr. Hazan and say, Dr. Hazan, isn't there better? And Dr. Hazan's going to say, well, why should there be better for you and not for the kid that lives in Brooklyn? Don't you think we should start looking into better for everyone? And so this is where I stand right now at this junction, having done 3 decades of clinical trials and hundreds of clinical trials for pharma. I stand at this road where I basically get to say to pharma, it's time to start looking at a new path. It's time to start looking at the microbiome. It's time to do better. We did great. You guys made a lot of money. Now take that money and invest in a research that's going to basically guide better results for patients, that they don't have to think that they're patients, that they can improve their mental health. Because unfortunately, with every disease, there's mental health issues. Who wants to be a patient? Who wants to remember that they're taking prednisone, that they're taking biologics, that they have to be at the doctor? Who wants to be stressing about the fact that they have to maintain their health insurance? Otherwise, they will be responsible for $17,000 a month of prescriptions. No one.
Mm. That mind-body connection, how did you come to realize that was so important that they go together?
Um, I think I've always been in tuned
Ooh.
with that. I did a bachelor's of science in biology, exercise science, and nutrition. It was like a double major and a minor in nutrition. And I've always realized that if you're exercising, your mind is better. If you're
Ooh.
eating better, your mind is better. If you're, having a bowel movement every day, your mind is better. So to me, the gut always had a role in my mental health, right? People that are constipated are miserable. People that have diarrhea, they're miserable, right? They're constantly have to look for a bathroom whenever they're anxious, they're edgy, they can't enjoy the meal in a restaurant because they know they're going to have to go to the bathroom, right? People that don't have a bowel movement for days, weeks, they're miserable, right? So I think it definitely plays a role. I've certainly seen it in my career, thousands of patients that have diarrhea or constipation. So there's definitely a brain gut problem. People feel better, they have a bowel movement, they feel better. It's like they're floating again, right?
Right.
Um, it's only when I started playing with stools and fecal transplant, really, that I started paying attention more to that brain gut and noticing that if I took a microbiome of a happy person and
Yeah.
and I gave it, and that was an N of one, of course, incidental finding, but giving it to a patient that was suicidal, chronic urinary tract
Wow.
infection, C. diff, psoriasis, that patient would not be suicidal. Now, obviously not reproducible, not something that I could say, oh my God, I've done a dozen suicidal cases and it's improved.
Right.
Because unfortunately, these cases do not come around every day. And I really believe there's a donor component,
Ooh.
because I think, in that case, that happened to be a yoga instructor, vegetarian. I did a whole mini mental status, etc. And she, and she was evaluated properly to say this is a
Mm.
perfect candidate to be given. It's not always the case. Too often we think the neighbor is a good donor, but we don't know the story of the donor. We don't know that the donor secretly is suicidal or depressed or anxious, right? So I think, the field is promising, but it is definitely a field that has a lot of unknowns. And I'm kind of like, if I say I'm going fast and forward and moving everyone out of the way, it's literally
Ooh.
boxing everyone out of the way because people don't realize this is so important. There is nothing more important in this life right now than understanding the microbiome. It's going to directly affect your life, affect your kids'
Mhm.
lives. And if we don't pay attention, in this lifetime, we've lost because microbes are taking over our bodies when we die and put us back into the ground. These microbes are still alive. To think that we're just here for us and oh my God, I'm so great and look at myself on social media, etc. No, you're not here for yourself. You're here to do a job. My job, I know my job. My job is to wake up humanity to the microbiome and the fact that humanity is going extinct. That's what
Mm.
wakes me up at night. We're seeing
Wow.
it with autism, and I think that's what got us to talk together.
Yes.
But we're definitely seeing it with autism, where basically, look, in 1970, the rate of autism was 1 in 10,000. Now it's 1 in 30 in some areas of the country. California, 1 in 12.5 boys have autism. This is not something that's going away. This is something that's getting worse. If you look at the data that just came out recently, looking at the microbiome, 25% of newborns are born with adequate levels of good bacteria. Our own data, we're showing, I can tell you out of 4,000 stool samples, less than 5% have bifidobacteria, which is an important microbe that helps us break down sugars. So, what happens when 1 in 1 kid has autism? What happens when there's no more bifidobacteria on the planet because we've destroyed it all? We stop living. That's it.
Mm.
I mean, it's that simple. I mean, sure, there could be other microbes that stand up and become resilient and take over the job of bifidobacteria, but we need to understand them, you know? That's it.
And what have you learned about the connection between the gut health and autism?
So if you go back to autism, and I'm going to kind of go back
Yeah,
to autism. If you go back to autism, what we discovered was, first of all, in the microbiome space, we discovered everybody is different. We all have a fingerprint of our microbiome,
interesting.
which is why wouldn't we? We're all eating different foods. We all came from different areas of the world, and then we traveled to different areas of the world, right? So why wouldn't we be, different in our microbiome? The second thing we noticed is families are different. So families are similar. So in other words, I can look at my microbiome and my kid's microbiome, and it's basically one of my kid is very similar in my microbiome, and her personality is very similar to mine. And then my other kid is very similar to her father, and her personality is very similar to her father. When you look at families of autism, and that was, the big discovery in a way, we discovered that and we published this case, which was a mom with triplets. We discovered that the mom with triplets had an overgrowth of a certain group of microbes. And the triplets, two of the triplets didn't have that microbe, but the one with autism had twice the amount of microbes that the mom had. We then looked at those kids that were neurotypical and we said, well, the neurotypical have a diverse microbiome. They don't have that microbe. They could be good candidates for the third one to transplant, right? That's where the idea of familial fecal transplant came from. From there, my first case, which was an N of one, in 2019, we submitted that case to the FDA because the FDA requires that if you're going to do fecal transplant, on any condition other than C. diff, you need FDA involved, rightfully so, because you're playing with trillions of
Right.
microbes and you could kill the person. In fact, there were two deaths. Obviously, there's thousands of fecal transplants that are done every year, but there were two deaths, and that kind of got the attention of the FDA. Now, if that case took 3 years because there was COVID, but we picked one of the sisters to be the donor, and she had an amazing amount of bifidobacteria. She had an amazing microbiome diversity, etc. So we decided, let me give this to the kid. And he had an overgrowth of a certain bacteria, Lactobacillus animalis. What we discovered after transplant was that the bacteria disappeared, the Lactobacillus animalis. The bifidobacteria started climbing a little bit, but the diversity came back and started growing, and he started having microbes that his sister had, and he started matching his sister. That's called engraftment. This is very important because engraftment determines success of a fecal transplant.
Oh, wow.
Engraftment is not told by too many labs, right? Our lab, Progenibiome, is the one that basically started spearheading this concept of engraftment to showcase how does fecal transplant work. Is it engrafting? Is it staying? Is it persisting? And we came out with it in full transparency because we want to teach the GI doctors and we want the public to know, how do you know a fecal transplant worked? Because too many people go to Germany, they go to all over the world, Mexico, to do fecal transplant, and it doesn't work.
Wow.
They don't know who was their donor. They didn't know if it
Oh,
grafted. They didn't know the microbes. There's a whole forensics of the microbiome that goes on when I decide who I'm going to do, which donor I'm going to pick, etc. It's not very easy. So from there, that N of one case showed us that the kid started speaking, verbalizing. He was no longer aggressive. The family was having a quality of life. They were no longer have to stay up all night. Each one of them had to stay up all night because they were afraid their kid was gonna, kill himself, or pick up a toilet or something, or walk out of the house. And so because of that aggressivity of this kid, they couldn't sleep. So one was always staying up all night. What we discovered with this kid improving was really this change of the microbiome, the improvement of bifidobacteria, the fact that he had zero bifidobacteria to begin with. COVID, got us to pay attention to bifidobacteria.
Mm.
COVID, because we discovered that those people that had severe COVID had zero bifidobacteria.
Mm.
And the people that were exposed to COVID but never got COVID, like my manager of my lab, who handled thousands of samples, who took care of her kid with COVID, never got COVID. Why? She had a lot of bifidobacteria. So, when you monitor that and you see the importance of bifidobacteria, you start thinking differently. You start thinking, okay, well, maybe bifidobacteria suppresses the virus. Maybe who else has loss of bifidobacteria? Come to find out, autistic kids have loss of bifidobacteria. We took over 100 kids. We took siblings, and
Mhm.
we looked at the siblings versus the kid with autism, and the kid with
Mhm.
autism had very low bifidobacteria compared to their siblings. But then when we compared that data to kids that were not in that family environment, those kids had a lot more bifidobacteria because they're not in that stressful environment living with a kid with an overaccumulation of certain microbes, and that's aggressive. And you can imagine the stress level in the family, etc., when a kid is just not sitting down, not paying attention, etc. Um, so from there, we basically decided, well, bifidobacteria seems to be very important. Let's see how we can manipulate the microbiome to improve the bifidobacteria. And that's a case that's coming out in October at the American College of Gastro. Two identical twins, same exact microbes disappeared after 9 months, and the bifidobacteria goes up. And basically, these kids are verbalizing, they're reading, they're counting, they're doing amazing. The mom is besides herself. So, this is my work. This is, the whole path. So if that doesn't show you brain gut connection, I don't know what does. Restoring the microbiome, saving the BIF, improving the bifidobacteria, and the kids are verbalizing. This is a new revelation. And it's, I think it's going to be one of the biggest discoveries of the century, in my opinion.
Wow, cutting edge research. And for the parents who maybe have less access, how can they increase that?
So it's very difficult to increase the
Mm.
bifidobacteria. It's very difficult because there's so many, I tell people it's like a forest that
Yeah.
is burning, and you're trying to replant the trees, but the forest is still burning and you're pouring gasoline and water on the forest, right? And so you got to control the fire first. You got to stop the gasoline. You got to pour the water. And then you got to, remove all the debris. And then you got to turn the earth. And then you got to replant. And you got to make sure that there's no other fires or hurricane that comes into the forest to let it grow, right? It's the same principle in the gut. We're not so different than a garden. You're growing your own garden of microbes. So, when I take a kid with a family, the first thing I do is I want to look at their microbiome picture.
Mm.
Why? Because I want to see, first of all, is this a microbiome issue? Not everything is microbiome, right? I
Mhm.
mean, I think the mistake we make in medicine is we believe everything is a one pill fix,
Oh.
everything is one cause. It's not.
Mhm.
Autism is multifactorial. It could be genetics in that kid. It could be brain gut. It could be the connection between the brain and the gut. It could be microbiome. And therefore, microbiome, where is it from? What's killing the bifidobacteria? What's killing the microbiome? What's leaving this kid with no good microbes? And that's when you have to kind of look at the environment, right? Is there mold in the house? What is the kid exposed to? What are the plants around him? What are the, pills he's taking? What are the supplements he's taking? Are there pesticides in is there pesticides in his food? Do the vitamins contain arsenic? Is there an overaccumulation of copper? Is there, all these foods, all these we live in a world, sadly, where it's so convenient to get your tomatoes and your food from the grocery store, but at the same time, at what cost, right? Cost of over manufacturing, over producing, quick farming, quick, turnover of the land. That's not, it's unfortunately, there's a poor quality of those foods. And you could see it, when you have like a farm that's turning around the the tomatoes in like every 3 months, you gotta, the tomato doesn't taste like a tomato anymore. I grow tomatoes in my backyard. They're not perfect, okay? They don't all look like these, you know, manufactured or, manipulated tomatoes. I think that's the problem. So you've got to look at that. You've got to look at the microbiome. You've got to do neurological testing. You've got to do questionnaires to assess the severity of the autistic child.
Mhm.
So I encourage anyone to contact Progenibiome to at least, if you can't afford the testing and all that, at least put yourself on a list, because as we get funding, we are pushing, trust me, every day. I ask, and I'm going to ask on your program, support the Microbiome Research Foundation.org. This is how we do research. I've put all my time, my energy. I've not made money. Even my companies, like my practice, everything goes into the foundation to do the research. This is my passion project. This is my legacy that I want to leave behind. This is not a billion-dollar business for me. We were offered a lot of money for Progenibiome, and I never took it because I want to discover. So this is essentially the nonprofit, but I can't support it on my own.
Right.
We've
Right.
done vitamins that are basically sold, that are tested at Progenibiome, and that are sold through the foundation to support the foundation. The biome boosters are supporting the foundation. All the proceeds go to
Right.
the foundation. But ultimately, we need funds because
Right.
we want to take care of as many kids as possible. These two twins, could not afford treatment or testing, but the mom did spend initially, and then we had to support it from the foundation. We had to give a grant, etc. So, you know, um, I think it's important for people to just give back, because essentially that's how we get to know what the truth. We're doing studies like, the studies we're doing are not money makers. They're not a
Right.
product. For example, vitamin C, improving the bifidobacteria. There's no money to be made on vitamin
Right.
C. Everybody can sell vitamin C. You cannot patent it. So but the study needs to be done, right? What does cumin do to the microbiome? What does lactoferrin do to the microbiome? Manuka honey, et cetera, et cetera. These are important studies that are needed. And this is where the Microbiome Research Foundation is important to get us to have that understanding. So for autism, they're welcome to contact progenibiome.com to put their names on the list. We have finally been approved by the FDA to run that protocol. Thank you, FDA.
Oh, wow.
I know it was 5.5 years of my life and
Oh,
hundreds of thousands of dollars of regulatory, because every time you have to do a rebuttal to the FDA, um, you know, you have to kind of spend money, and these regulatory personnel are $400 an hour, so nothing is cheap.
oh,
FDA lawyers, by the way, are $1,500 an hour. So, research is not cheap. And going the right way to do the research with the FDA paying attention, because if the FDA pays attention and says, you know what, Dr. Hazen, you're doing something right, and they back me up, then the doctors start paying attention to that. And then the goal is to have other doctors start using our protocol, the way we design the protocol, to reproduce the data and to them do it around the country. This is not a Sabine Hazen is going to do fecal transplant on 1 in 12 kids in California, 12 boys in California. I'll never be finished, and I need like 1,000 of me. This is not how I want to spend my life. But what I want to spend my life is teaching others to help those kids. Because Rome was not built in one day, and Rome was not built with one person.
right.
So I need humanity to join me. I need doctors to join me. I need, moms to join me, because together we can do this. Together we can help these kids. That's what matters the most. Our whole focus should be on these kids, because the reality is, if we don't do anything, 1 in 1 kid will be autistic. And
Oh,
then who's going to take care of us? Robots? I don't think so.
right. Are clinicians getting excited about your cutting edge research? Robert F. Kennedy is talking about autism.
Robert, it's so funny. Robert Kennedy and I have been on the same stage talking about autism, and we have the same moms that are basically, kind of pushing us, right? Because I'm sure he wants to do nothing but fish, fly fishing, and would be very happy fly fishing the rest of his life. But somebody went to in Malibu and brought him like a folder on autism, and he has such a big heart, and he's such a God-abiding citizen that he paid attention, and then it became his passion project. He had to. These you can't say no to these moms, okay? And I
Right.
was the same, and by the way, they're very
Yes.
strong, very forceful, and I was the same, with moms. I was like, I can't, it's too much. I mean, how am I going to do all this?
Yes.
And they were bringing me data after data, and then you see these kids that are not verbalizing, that are so adorable, and they want to say something, but they can't. And you can't help but take those kids to heart. And you can't help but, I would go home after I met that first kid that would break his teeth and bang his head on the wall, the first N of one that I did with the FDA. The whole time I came home and I saw my two girls, and I was like, wow, I'm so privileged that my girls are just, I don't have to watch them. They could just be independent and do whatever they want. But at the same time, I was like, wow, that poor mom is just a warrior nonstop. She's constantly, in a flight or fight, move. And I felt like I needed to step it up and help. And I've been privileged in my life. God has provided, and I felt this is my time to give back. And I think that N of one was the beginning, and then COVID kind of showed me the reality of the world and pharma, and woke me up to, what do you mean I can't do a clinical trial? What do you mean I'm censored? What do you mean I can't recruit? What do you mean Facebook just blocked my post on recruiting for COVID? So I became a little bit of a beast, because I was the girl that really helped the clinical trial world. I was the girl that would put a post on Facebook and get 20 patients with psoriasis to enter a clinical trial for pharma. When my own clinical trial on hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc got censored by Facebook, and I had all these trolls saying all sorts of things about me, I said, wait a minute, what's going on there? So I think, as a good message, Rachel, we should ask today for Mark Zuckerberg to donate to the Microbiome Research Foundation in view of the difficulties that he created for my
Yes.
protocol on hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, and ivermectin, doxycycline, and zinc. So
Mm.
if this message reaches Mark Zuckerberg, please donate to the Microbiome Research Foundation. I think it would be a nice gesture for these kids, and it would be a comeback for us to trust you and Facebook again. This is my message to Mark Zuckerberg.
Yes, I love it. And Dr.
And
Hazan,
by the way, a couple of other people, nefarious people, could do the same. They know who they are. I'm not going to mention them.
yes, I love it. Ask for help. We need to be an army, fighters, the clinicians, and the moms, all the parents. Why not? Get everybody together.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because the same forces of mom that managed to, are being heard. They are being heard. This is not, what we saw with the CDC, what we see with Robert Kennedy. This is the power of moms together under the radar fighting. And moms are speaking up right now. Moms are saying enough is enough. We want to see the research. And I, as a mom who has been on the clinical trials and has brought vaccines to the market, I want to see the research. I want to see the data. I want to see the pharmacokinetic studies on all these. I want full transparency. It's not hard to give transparency. We should have full transparency. It's our health. And in order to make an informed consent, we need full transparency. And these companies need to step it up.
Yes, I love it. And my last question for you, what makes you feel alive?
What makes me feel alive? waking up every morning and knowing that I've done a good deed. That's what makes me feel alive. Seeing two twins that improved, that are verbalizing, or a video from a mom of a kid that was running around, screaming, non-verbalizing, and all of a sudden she's interacting with another little girl and dancing and playing and verbalizing. That makes me happy. That makes me feel alive. It makes me feel like I've done something good with my life. And to me, that's what matters the most. All the money in the bank will not give you that feeling. Helping another person makes you feel good. When you help a person in need, and I encourage everybody to do that, it feels good inside. It wakes you up and it makes you, it empowers you because you know you're doing the right thing.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Sabine Hazan. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me today, and happy Labor Day.
Oh, yes, you're right. Thank you. Happy Labor Day to you too.
Pleasure.